Usually, when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this comforting expectation of precision.
Right, like engineering.
Exactly. You break your arm, the X-ray shows that jagged white line right across the bone, and the doctor just points to the film and says, there it is. That is the problem. It's visible. It's perfectly categorized.
It's a binary reality. I mean, it's either broken or it isn't.
But then you step into the world of international geopolitics, generational trauma, global warfare, and suddenly that diagnostic X-ray machine is completely shattered.
Yeah, it really is.
We are looking at a landscape right now that just defies simple categorization. So welcome to the deep dive. We are jumping straight into the unprecedented, massive, region-wide conflict that officially erupted on February 28, 2026.
Between the United States, Israel, and Iran.
Right, and the sheer suddenness of these strikes was staggering. In a matter of hours, a coordinated multinational assault killed Iran's supreme leader, leveled nuclear research facilities, and instantly pushed the atomic scientist's doomsday clock to 85 seconds to midnight.
And, to unpack an event of this magnitude, we've pulled together a massive, highly diverse stack of source materials for you today.
We're talking declassified military timelines, right?
Yeah, exactly. Plus extensive economic analyses on maritime choke points, historical documentation on regime survival strategies, and high-level policy briefings.
And before we go one step further, we need to make something explicitly clear to you, the listener. We are analyzing highly sensitive, actively unfolding, and, well, intensely politically charged events.
Right. And we're not taking sides.
No, not all.
We are not endorsing any specific political, military, or national viewpoint. Our sole mission today is to impartially report the facts, the historical context, and the different perspectives found strictly within our source material.
Because we're here to map out the underlying causality, we want to help you understand exactly how the world arrived at this precise, volatile moment.
Because to understand the explosion of February 28th, we can't just analyze the last week or the last month.
Right.
We have to dissect a 70-year ideological framework, the methodical dismantling of an asymmetrical proxy network, a failed 60-day diplomatic ultimatum, and finally a 39-kilometer stretch of water that fundamentally underwrites the entire global economy.
So let's start with the immediate catalyst. February 28, 2026, Israel launches Operation Roaring Lion, and the United States launches Operation Epic Fury.
Right.
We are talking about a combined 900 strike campaign executed within the very first 12 hours.
Which is just staggering. I mean, from a purely logistical standpoint, coordinating the airspace for 900 simultaneous strikes without friendly fire incidents or airspace collisions, that is a monumental feat of military engineering.
It's wild. And they were targeting the absolute nervous system of the Iranian state, right?
Yeah, they systematically dismantled command and control centers, ballistic missile silos, naval installations operated by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and critical integrated air defense systems.
But the most consequential strike, the one that completely altered the geopolitical calculus,
was the targeted destruction of the Supreme Leader's compound in Tehran.
Right, which killed Ayatollah Ali Khamenei alongside several top-tier military commanders. And the military hardware deployed here tells us exactly how highly the U.S. and Israel ranked this threat.
Oh, absolutely. The United States didn't just rely on standoff cruise missiles launched from destroyers.
No, they deployed 2 entire carrier strike groups to the region.
The Abraham Lincoln and the Gerald R. Ford.
Right. But the centerpiece of this operation was the deployment of the B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, and they flew these bombers halfway across the world for one highly specific reason.
To drop the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator.
AMOP.
The MOP. These are 30,000-pound precision-guided bunker busters.
And we really need to understand the physics of why a bomb needs to weigh 30,000 pounds. Like, they aren't dropping these to create a wider blast radius on the surface.
No, not at all. They're dropping them to defeat geology.
Defeat geology. I like that phrasing.
Because the primary target here was Fordo, the Iranian nuclear enrichment facility. And Fordo isn't just a reinforced concrete building. It's built roughly 80 meters deep into the solid rock of a mountain.
Right.
So to reach a facility buried that deep beneath solid granite and reinforced concrete, a standard munition is totally useless.
You need the MOP.
Exactly. The Massive Ordnance Penetrator relies on extreme kinetic energy and a highly specialized hardened steel casing. It's designed to impact the Earth, survive the friction and crush of burrowing through dozens of meters of solid rock, and then utilize a delayed smart fuse to detonate only once it has breached the subterranean void of the bunker.
Wow.
And in cases like Fordo, military analysts note that these bombers are actually trained to drop multiple MOPs sequentially.
Wait, like one right after the other?
Yes. The second bomb falls exactly into the crater created by the first, digging deeper and deeper into the mountain until the target is completely neutralized.
Okay, so the immediate aftermath of this overwhelming display of force was this severe clash of legal and moral narratives.
Right.
The United States and Israel justified this massive campaign as an absolute necessity. But the terminology they used is critical. They called these strikes both preemptive and preventive.
Yes, they did.
And I want to push back on how those terms are being blended, because in international law, they mean vastly different things.
They really do.
Like, a classic preemptive strike is governed by something called the Caroline test in international law. It requires a threat to be instant, overwhelming, and leaving no choice of means and no moment for deliberation.
Basically, striking an army that's massing on your border with engines running.
Right. The threat is imminent and undeniable. It's like shooting someone who is pointing a gun at you.
Right.
But a preventive war is entirely different. Preventive is breaking into their house and shooting them because you think they might buy a gun next year. You're striking them because they're building a capability, like a nuclear program, that might allow them to attack you 5 years from now.
And international law generally views preventive war as illegal.
Exactly. Because if every nation adopted a doctrine of attacking rivals based on future potential, the entire international order would collapse into perpetual, proactive warfare. So how are the U.S. and Israel reconciling this? Which one are they claiming this is?
Well, they're essentially arguing a hybrid doctrine of existential emergency. They claim there was actionable intelligence of an imminent, massive attack being coordinated by Iran and its remaining proxy forces, which satisfies the preemptive argument.
Okay.
But simultaneously, they argue that Iran was in a full-speed, unstoppable dash to assemble a nuclear warhead, and that allowing a regime with Iran's history to cross the nuclear threshold was a risk too grave to ignore.
Thereby justifying the preventive destruction of Fordo and Natanz.
Precisely. Now, naturally, the Iranian government vehemently rejects this entire framework.
Of course.
They label the multinational assault as unprovoked, entirely illegal under the UN Charter, and an act of naked imperialist aggression.
And their response was not limited to diplomatic condemnations.
No. Within hours, Iran launched a massive retaliatory barrage consisting of over 400 ballistic missiles and hundreds of loitering munitions.
The suicide drones?
Right. And this retaliation was not solely directed at Israel. Iran targeted U.S. military installations spread across the Persian Gulf.
With horrific consequences. We have confirmed reports that one of those ballistic missiles penetrated the air defense umbrella over an airbase in Doha, Qatar, resulting in the deaths of 6 Iowa Army reservists.
It's a tragedy. And furthermore, the civilian toll inside Iran from the initial Allied strikes is still being tabulated, but the numbers are grim.
Yeah, independent monitors are reporting significant civilian casualties.
Including a really devastating incident where 153 people were killed when the school was struck.
Which was likely the result of an air defense intercept or a targeting failure.
The human tragedy is just immense, and the speed of the escalation has left the international community reeling. But, as sudden as February 28th felt, this explosion is the culmination of a deeply entrenched historical trajectory.
Exactly. This didn't happen in a vacuum. The geopolitical animosity driving these strikes wasn't born in 2026 or even in 2023.
No.
If we're going to understand the underlying causality, we have to rewind the tape and examine the historical foundations. And this is where that diagnostic X-ray of international relations gets incredibly murky.
Because the two sides do not even agree on when the conflict started.
It's like a generational family feud, where each side starts the story at a completely different date. If you ask an American policymaker, the timeline of hostility generally begins in November 1979.
With the Iranian takeover of the U.S. Embassy and the subsequent hostage crisis.
Right. Viewed as an unprovoked violation of international norms. But if you examine the Iranian strategic mindset, 1979 is not the beginning of the story.
No, they view 1979 as a reaction to the actual beginning, which they firmly place in 1953.
The 1953 coup d'etat.
Yeah, this is a critical historical pivot. In the early 1950s, Iran had a democratically elected, highly popular secular prime minister named Mohammad Mossadegh.
And Mossadegh made a legislative decision that deeply threatened Western economic hegemony, didn't he?
He led the Iranian parliament to nationalize the country's vast oil reserves. Up until that point, Iranian oil was almost entirely controlled and extracted by the British.
Through the Anglo-Persian Oil Company.
Which we know today as BP.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right. So the British economy, which was still recovering from World War II, was heavily reliant on the incredibly favorable terms they had extracting Iranian oil. Nationalization was an economic catastrophe for London.
But the British knew they couldn't convince the United States to intervene purely to save British corporate profits, right?
Exactly. So they reframed the narrative for Washington.
They played the Cold War card.
They absolutely did.
Yeah.
The British convinced the Eisenhower administration that Mossadegh's actions were destabilizing Iran and that this instability would inevitably allow Iran's domestic, Moscow-aligned Communist Party, the Tudeh Party, to seize power.
And the fear that Iran, with its massive energy reserves and strategic coastline, could fall behind the Iron Curtain, that was just unacceptable to Washington.
Completely unacceptable, which led the CIA and Britain's MI6 to orchestrate Operation Ajax.
They actively funded opposition groups, bribed military officers, cited propaganda.
And successfully engineered a coup that overthrew Prime Minister Mossadegh. He was arrested, tried for treason, and placed under house arrest for the rest of his life.
And in his place, the US and UK fully backed the return of the Shah, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, installing him as an absolute monarch.
And the Shah's 26-year rule fundamentally reshaped Iranian society. The United States poured military and economic aid into his government, viewing him as a vital pillar of stability in the Middle East.
But domestically, the Shah ruled with an iron fist.
He really did. He utilized a notoriously brutal domestic intelligence and secret police agency known as Savak.
Which, importantly, was initially trained by the CIA and Israeli intelligence.
Right. And he used Savak to crush political dissent, torture opposition figures, and maintain strict authoritarian control.
So you have a quarter century where the Iranian populace is subjected to severe political repression by a monarch who is widely viewed as a puppet of Western powers.
It creates a deeply pressurized domestic environment.
It perfectly sets the stage for a massive structural backlash. Which brings us right back to 1979, the Islamic Revolution.
Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini returns from exile and successfully leads a massive popular uprising that completely dismantles the Shah's monarchy.
And what's vital to understand about 1979 is that it was not solely a theological movement.
No, it was fundamentally structurally anti-imperialist.
The religious rhetoric was deeply intertwined with a profound rejection of Western interference. This is the era where the ideological lexicon of the modern Iranian state is codified.
Right, the United States is branded the Great Satan, representing global imperial dominance.
And Israel is labeled the Little Satan, viewed as an illegitimate colonial outpost of American power in the Middle East.
And this deeply ingrained anti-Western ideology was immediately operationalized. In November 1979, militant students stormed the U.S. Embassy in Tehran.
Taking 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage and holding them in captivity for 444 days. For the American public, this was an agonizing, televised humiliation that permanently poisoned diplomatic relations.
And the trauma just compounds from there. In the 1980s, you have the horrific Iran-Iraq War. Saddam Hussein invades Iran, triggering an 8-year conflict characterized by brutal trench warfare and the extensive use of chemical weapons by Iraq.
Hundreds of thousands of Iranians died.
And from Iran's perspective, the United States was deeply complicit, having provided logistical support, satellite intelligence, and economic aid to Saddam Hussein during the conflict.
And we also have to include the tragedy of 1988, which is an event deeply seared into the Iranian national consciousness, even if it is largely faded from American memory.
The USS Vincennes.
Right. A U.S. Navy guided missile cruiser operating in the Persian Gulf shot down Iran Air Flight 655, which was a scheduled civilian passenger flight. All 290 people on board, including 66 children, were killed.
The U.S. military stated that the crew of the Vincennes tragically misidentified the civilian Airbus A300 as an attacking Iranian F-14 Tomcat fighter jet.
But the Iranian government and much of its population viewed it not as a tragic error, but as a deliberate act of state terrorism designed to force Iran into capitulation in the Iran-Iraq War.
When you compile these events, the 1953 coup, the backing of the Shah, the Iran-Iraq War, the downing of Flight 655, you begin to understand the immense cognitive dissonance between Washington and Tehran.
Every action is viewed through an entirely different historical prism.
Exactly.
But let's look at how this history practically affected Iran's military strategy. Because coming out of the Iran-Iraq War, the Iranian leadership learned a very harsh lesson, didn't they?
They realized that as a Persian-speaking, majority Shia nation surrounded by Arab majority Sunni nations and facing the conventional military dominance of the United States and Israel, They could never win a traditional force-on-force conventional war.
Right. Their air force was aging, their supply chains were heavily sanctioned, and they were geographically isolated.
So necessity dictated a profound shift in military doctrine. Iran realized that to survive, they had to fight asymmetrically. They had to project power without engaging in direct conventional battles that they would undoubtedly lose.
This realization gave birth to what Iranian military planners call the forward defense doctrine. But in the West, and particularly in Israel, it's known as the Ring of Fire.
The strategy was brilliant in its ruthless pragmatism. Over the course of decades, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, specifically the elite Quds Force, invested billions of dollars in funding, training, and heavily arming a disparate network of proxy militias across the Middle East.
We're talking about the axis of resistance. This includes Hezbollah to the north in Lebanon, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad to the west in Gaza, the Houthis to the south in Yemen, and a complex web of Shia militias operating across Iraq and Syria.
And the geopolitical leverage this provided Iran was massive. The logic was basically, we will actively fight our adversaries in the streets of Beirut, in the tunnels of Gaza, and in the deserts of Syria so that we never have to fight them on the streets of Tehran.
Okay, let's unpack this. Iran's whole strategy was a geographic meat shield. It's a strategy of cost imposition and plausible deniability. By surrounding Israel with this ring of fire, Iran established a powerful, conventional deterrent.
Right.
For years, the prevailing consensus within the Israeli defense establishment was that a preemptive strike on Iran's nuclear facilities was effectively impossible.
Because the moment Israeli jets crossed into Iranian airspace, Iran would simply give the order, and Hezbollah would unleash an arsenal of an estimated 150,000 rockets and precision-guided missiles onto Tel Aviv and Haifa,
Overwhelming Israel's Iron Dome and causing unacceptable civilian casualties.
It was a tense, incredibly violent equilibrium. For over a decade, Israel engaged in a strategy they cynically referred to as mowing the grass.
Right, periodically weakening proxies without seeking total war.
Yeah, they would utilize targeted intelligence and precision airstrikes to degrade the capabilities of these proxy groups, hitting a weapons convoy in Syria here, assassinating a militia leader there, keeping the threat at a manageable level without triggering a full-scale multi-front war.
They accepted a certain baseline level of existential threat as the cost of doing business in the Middle East. But that entire paradigm, the entire philosophy of mowing the grass, was absolutely shattered on October 7, 2023.
When Hamas breached the border fence and launched its unprecedented, devastating attack on southern Israel, the psychological and strategic calculus in Jerusalem shifted overnight.
Post-October 7th, Israel shifted to total eradication. The Israeli political and military leadership concluded that tolerating heavily armed Iranian-backed proxy forces on their immediate borders was no longer a manageable nuisance. It was an acute, unacceptable existential risk.
And the shift from containment to systemic eradication was methodical, and the scale of the operations over the subsequent 2 years fundamentally altered the balance of power in the region.
Let's focus on how Israel dismantled Hezbollah, because the sheer technological audacity of it is almost hard to comprehend. By late 2024, Israel turned its full military and intelligence apparatus toward Lebanon.
And they initiated this campaign with Operation Grimbeeper.
I want to dive deeply into the mechanics of this because it highlights the vulnerability of modern supply chains.
Absolutely.
Hezbollah, fully aware that Israeli intelligence could track, hack, and geolocate modern smartphones, made a low-tech pivot. They ordered thousands of alphanumeric pagers for their operatives, believing that closed network, one-way communication devices would be secure.
What they didn't know was that Israeli intelligence, likely the Mossad, in coordination with Unit 8200, their signals intelligence division, had deeply infiltrated the global supply chain.
They didn't just intercept a shipment, did they?
No, they reportedly set up front companies in Europe to actually manufacture the pagers themselves.
And the engineering required for this is staggering. They didn't just pack the pagers with explosives that would be easily detected by weight discrepancies or X-ray scanners.
Intelligence sources indicate they meticulously integrated highly explosive material, likely PTN, directly into the battery casing itself.
Wow.
They modified the lithium-ion batteries so that they functioned normally as a power source, but contained a lethal explosive core, complete with a microscopic detonator connected to the pager's receiving circuitry.
The operational security required to manufacture, ship, and distribute thousands of these compromised devices to specific Hezbollah operatives over the course of months without a single leak or detection. It's just unprecedented.
And then, in September 2024, Intelligence indicated that a Hezbollah operative might have grown suspicious of the devices.
So it was a use it or lose it scenario.
Exactly. Facing that scenario, Israel sent a specific alphanumeric message to the pagers. Upon receipt, the circuitry triggered the detonator. Simultaneously, across Lebanon and parts of Syria, thousands of pagers exploded in the pockets and hands of Hezbollah personnel.
And the immediate tactical impact was devastating. Dozens were killed, and roughly 4,000 operatives were severely injured, many suffering permanent maiming to their hands and eyes.
But the strategic impact was even greater. It completely severed Hezbollah's internal communications network. Trust in any electronic device evaporated.
And Israel capitalized on that chaos immediately. Just days later, with their secure communications destroyed, Hezbollah's senior leadership, including their long-standing Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, were forced to meet in person to coordinate their response.
They gathered deep in a fortified subterranean bunker complex beneath a residential area in the Dahia suburb of Beirut.
And the intelligence coup was astonishing. An Iranian informant reportedly provided the exact time and location of the meeting.
And the military execution was overwhelming. To destroy a bunker complex buried that deep beneath urban infrastructure requires an unbelievable amount of ordnance.
8 Israeli F-15s dropped over 100 missiles in 3.5 minutes, right?
Yes. They deployed 2,000-pound bunker busters, utilizing a technique where the bombs are timed to hit the exact same impact point in rapid succession, burrowing through the reinforced concrete layer by layer until the entire subterranean complex collapsed.
Hassan Nasrallah was killed, completely decapitating Hezbollah's leadership structure. And this eradication campaign continued across the entire Ring of Fire. By late 2025, that shield was completely shattered.
The Assad regime in Syria, a crucial logistical bridge for Iran to supply Hezbollah, collapsed under renewed rebel offensives exacerbated by Israeli strikes on Syrian military infrastructure.
And in Gaza, the architect of the October 7th attacks, Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, was tracked down and killed by Israeli infantry. The network that Iran had spent 40 years and billions of dollars building was, for all intents and purposes, systematically extinguished.
But this brings up a crucial analytical question.
Right. Did Israel's destruction of the proxies actually force Iran to race for a nuclear bomb since their conventional deterrent was gone?
It is the ultimate security dilemma. When one state takes actions to increase its own security, in this case, Israel destroying proxy threats, it inherently decreases the security of its adversary, prompting a severe reaction.
If you systematically strip a hostile nation of all its conventional deterrents, don't you logically force them to pursue the ultimate absolute deterrent?
Israeli intelligence argued vehemently that this was exactly what was happening. They assessed that with Hezbollah neutralized, Iran had activated a clandestine program to rapidly assemble a deliverable nuclear warhead.
Now, whether the broader U.S. intelligence community shared that exact timeline or level of certainty is debated, but that profound fear, the assessment that Iran was weeks or months away from crossing the nuclear threshold, is the exact catalyst that triggered the frantic, desperate diplomatic efforts of early 2026.
Which brings us to the 60-day ultimatum. But to truly understand why those negotiations in Oman failed so catastrophically, we have to look away from the geopolitical chessboard for a moment.
Right. We have to look directly at the domestic reality inside Iran, the pressure cooker of December 2025.
The economic situation inside Iran had reached a critical failure point. Decades of compounding international sanctions, combined with systemic government corruption and the massive financial drain of funding proxy wars across the region, had finally broken the Iranian economy.
Inflation was spiraling into hyperinflation. Basic necessities were becoming unaffordable for the middle and lower classes.
And this economic desperation ignited a nationwide uprising. Millions of Iranians took to the streets in December 2025. But unlike previous protests that focused on specific policy reforms or election disputes, these protests were structural.
The populace was demanding the wholesale dismantling of the Islamic Republic, and the regime's response was an application of state violence on a scale that is difficult to process.
They recognized that the protests pose a genuine existential threat to their grip on power. Their first move was a total information blackout.
They manipulated the Border Gateway Protocol, essentially severing the country's internet infrastructure from the global web,
plunging 90 million people into digital darkness so that images of the crackdown could not reach the outside world.
Once the information flow was cut, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the besieged paramilitary forces were deployed with live ammunition. And the estimates from human rights observers and international intelligence agencies are just horrifying.
Over the course of just 48 hours, security forces slaughtered roughly 30,000 Iranian civilians.
Wait, 30,000 people in 2 days?
In 48 hours. It is a level of domestic pacification that echoes the darkest chapters of the 20th century.
So you have a regime that has just waded through rivers of its own citizens' blood to maintain power. They are paranoid, deeply isolated, and fully aware of how deeply they are hated by their own populace. This is the psychological state of the Iranian leadership when they walk into secret, back-channel negotiations in Oman in February 2026.
Representing the United States in Oman were envoys from the newly inaugurated Trump administration, specifically Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner.
And the diplomatic posture of the U.S. was absolute zero tolerance. President Trump issued a rigid 60-day ultimatum. Iran must verifiably cease all uranium enrichment and permanently dismantle its nuclear infrastructure.
To understand why this demand was categorically rejected, we have to look at the history of nuclear diplomacy with Iran, specifically the deeply scarred legacy of the JCPOA.
The 2015 nuclear deal under Obama.
The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. It was a milestone multilateral agreement involving the U.S., UK, France, Russia, China, and Germany. The core premise was that Iran would agree to severe, highly monitored restrictions on its nuclear program in exchange for the lifting of crippling economic sanctions.
The deal was meticulously designed to keep Iran's breakout time, the time needed to enrich enough uranium for one bomb at least a year away.
But the Israeli government, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, viewed the JCPOA as a historic mistake. They argued it was fundamentally flawed because the restrictions had expiration dates, sunset clauses, and because the deal completely ignored Iran's ballistic missile program and its funding of proxy militias.
And Israel didn't just argue this politically, they executed one of the most audacious intelligence operations in modern history to prove their point.
In 2018, Mossad operatives infiltrated a highly secure, nondescript warehouse in a commercial district of Tehran. In a matter of hours, they cracked multiple safes and extracted 55,000 pages of highly classified documents and 183 CDs containing Iran's secret atomic archives.
They physically smuggled half a ton of classified material out of the country, and those archives proved that Iran had, for years, actively maintained a coordinated, highly structured nuclear weapons design program.
Completely contradicting their public claims that their nuclear ambitions were entirely peaceful. That intelligence heist provided the Trump administration during his first term with the justification to unilaterally withdraw the United States from the JCPOA in 2018.
Trump pulled out and initiated a campaign of maximum pressure, reimposing massive sanctions designed to crush the Iranian economy.
So when we return to the negotiating table in Oman in 2026, you have to look at it from the perspective of the Iranian supreme leader. The United States had previously signed a deal. Iran had complied with it, which was verified by the IAEA at the time, and then the U.S. unilaterally tore it up and devastated the Iranian economy anyway.
Now that same U.S. president is back, demanding not just a return to restrictions, but zero nuclear enrichment.
For a nation with thousands of years of imperial history, demanding them to accept unconditional surrender on its nuclear program was a red line they would never cross, regardless of the consequences.
And there is a profound, tragic irony here. So Trump wanted to support the Iranian protesters during the December uprisings. The stated goal was to see the regime collapse from within.
Right.
But the resulting war has actually given the regime a perfect excuse to lock down the country even harder. External conflict allows a regime to instantly rebrand domestic political opposition as treason. The ultimatum meant to break the regime may have actually provided a precise mechanism for its survival.
It is the brutal reality of the rally around the flag effect. When bombs start falling on the Capitol, the space for civil society and domestic reform instantly evaporates.
And when those 60 days expired with no diplomatic breakthrough in February 2026, the U.S. and Israel acted immediately, the B-2 bombers launched, and the strikes commenced.
But as we discussed, as the bombs fell on Tehran, Iran played its final, most devastating card. Not a nuclear bomb, but a geographical chokehold.
Which brings us to the economic focal point of this entire conflict, the Strait of Hormuz. This is the part of the deep dive where a war halfway across the globe suddenly and violently impacts every single listener directly in their wallet.
Absolutely.
We need to fully visualize the Strait of Hormuz. It's just 39 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, bordering Iran to the north and Oman to the south.
And the navigable shipping lanes are even narrower due to the shallow depths of the surrounding waters. The deep water channels capable of accommodating massive supertankers are only about 2 miles wide in each direction, separated by a 2-mile buffer zone.
It is the transit point for 27% of global maritime oil trade and 20% of global liquefied natural gas trade, primarily originating from Qatar.
Immediately following the U.S. and Israeli strikes, Iran officially declared the strait closed to all commercial maritime traffic.
And they backed it up by attacking commercial ships. So far, there have been 10 confirmed attacks and 5 crew members have been killed. And the weapon systems Iran has dedicated to this blockade are highly sophisticated. They have heavily mined the strait.
Naval intelligence estimates Iran possesses an inventory of roughly 6,000 naval mines. And we need to explain how diverse and terrifying this arsenal is.
Yeah, please break that down.
Modern naval warfare relies on 3 primary categories of mines. First, there are limpet mines, which are covertly attached directly to the hull of a ship by specialized divers or fast attack craft.
Okay.
Second, there are moored mines. These are tethered to the ocean floor and float just below the surface, waiting for a vessel to physically strike them.
But the most dangerous are the influence mines, specifically the bottom mines.
Right. These sit entirely undetected on the seafloor. They are equipped with sophisticated acoustic, magnetic, and pressure sensors. They don't need to be touched.
Oh, wow. So they just wait for the right ship.
Exactly. They are programmed to recognize the specific acoustic signature of a massive oil tanker's propellers, or the magnetic distortion caused by hundreds of thousands of tons of steel passing overhead. When a ship enters their threshold, they detonate, sending a massive shock wave of displaced water upward that literally breaks the keel of the ship in half.
In addition to the mines, Iran has stationed batteries of anti-ship cruise missiles along the coastline, and they utilize swarms of fast attack craft to harass and overwhelm commercial shipping. And the economic shockwaves for the listener were instantaneous.
Global oil prices spiked by 10%.
And European natural gas jumped by an astonishing 63%. But this isn't just about gas prices. The Strait of Hormuz is a massive transit point for hidden commodities that undergird modern manufacturing and agriculture.
Let's talk about helium.
Right. Roughly 30% of the entire world's supply of helium is extracted in Qatar and shipped through the strait. And if you want to manufacture advanced semiconductors and microchips, you have to use liquid helium for a process called extreme ultraviolet lithography.
If the helium supply chain is severed, global semiconductor manufacturing grinds to a halt.
It cascades into agriculture as well. The region supplies massive amounts of urea, which is a chemical fertilizer vital for global food production.
If urea shipments are trapped, global agricultural production drops, and we face severe spikes in food prices.
And there's also sulfur, which is used for sulfuric acid, vital for mining critical minerals in Africa. The Strait of Hormuz is basically the jugular vein of the global economy. If you pinch it, the whole body starts to panic. So, facing this, a very obvious question arises. Can't the U.S. Navy just escort the ships?
Well, the U.S. has threatened a militarized escort operation, and the U.S. Development Finance Corporation, the DFC, is offering a massive $20 billion political risk insurance fund to cover potential losses. But the maritime logistics industry is refusing to play ball.
Why? $20 billion is a massive safety net.
Because insurance policies reimburse a corporation after their vessel sinks or their crew is killed.
Right.
Insurance does not stop a Chinese-designed anti-ship cruise missile from tearing through the bridge of a tanker.
Right.
Insurers are hiking premiums by 4 to 5 times. It's economically unviable. And frankly, shipping companies are terrified for the safety of their crews.
So they're opting instead for the massive, expensive detour around the Cape of Good Hope. Rerouting around Africa adds 10 to 14 days of transit time in each direction. It absorbs massive amounts of global shipping capacity and creates a cascading inflationary shock.
All of which brings us back to the human element at the absolute center of this geopolitical chessboard, the Iranian people caught in the crossfire.
The regime claims the war is unifying the country, but the reality is deeply fractured.
The narrative is heavily distorted. It's a false dichotomy. You see state propaganda showing masses mourning the Ayatollah, and you see elements of the diaspora celebrating his death.
But the vast majority of the 90 million people living inside the country live in the gray area. They harbor a deep structural hatred for the Islamic Republic that killed 30,000 of their own citizens months ago.
But they are equally terrified of foreign intervention. They fear Iran could become destabilized, like neighboring Iraq or Afghanistan.
Right. They know democracy is not delivered on the warhead of a bunker buster. And the political reality they're trapped in is shifting rapidly. With the death of the supreme leader, there is an immediate political vacuum.
Constitutionally, the Expediency Council has set up a triumvirate. Meanwhile, the Assembly of Experts is sequestered, intensely debating who will succeed Khamenei.
But the real power lies with the men holding the guns. The IRGC is utilizing this war to execute an internal coup. They are using the war as an excuse to securitize the country further, treating any domestic opposition as foreign-backed treason.
Is an agonizing reality.
It's like being trapped in a burning building, and the fire department's solution is to bulldoze the entire block while you're still inside. You want the fire out, but you also want to survive, especially when you consider the civilian casualties from the strikes, like the 153 people killed in that school.
And the outcome of this deeply chaotic internal struggle and the wider war will shape the security architecture of the Middle East and the world you live in for decades to come.
Okay, we need to take a breath and summarize the massive ground we've covered today. From a 1953 coup to a shattered ring of fire, a failed 60-day ultimatum, a multinational bombing campaign, and a crippled global shipping lane.
Every single action was a calculated reaction to the action that preceded it.
And we want to remind you, the listener, that whether you are paying more at the grocery store due to fertilizer shortages, waiting longer for electronics due to helium delays, or simply watching the global geopolitical order shift, this deep dive explains why it is happening.
Exactly.
And I want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative concept to mull over on your own. As this war chokes off 20% of the world's oil and gas, it raises a massive question. Will this conflict force the world into a painful economic depression? Or could the sheer economic necessity of bypassing the Middle East actually accelerate the global transition away from fossil fuels and toward nuclear and green energy?
It's a profound thought. Historically, massive structural leaps are often born out of desperate wartime necessity.
Could this devastating war accidentally force the green transition? Something to think about. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to keep questioning the headlines. Until next time.